Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, he's been to Iraq half a dozen times, covering not only the strategies behind our invasion of that country, but also the struggles of those living in a war zone. A conversation with reporter George Packer next on Dialogue. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. A welcome as well to those of you listening on public radio and the World Wide Web. He's been called the Zelig of the Iraq War. Like the fictional Woody Allen character, reporter George Packer seemed to be everywhere in Iraq, covering both the decision makers and those carrying out the mission, including Iraqis working for us. Now a staff writer for the New Yorker magazine, Packer had never been to Iraq before 2003. He went in part because he could. There was a period after the war began when things were relatively calm. But he continued to go back a total of 6 times, even when the situation got worse. He's distinguished himself for bringing to light the people involved in the war, both on the American and the Iraqi sides. Many of those stories are in his book, The Assassin's Gate, which was named one of the 10 best books of 2005 by the New York Times and won an Overseas Press Club Book Award. I sat down with Mr. Packer at the Sun Valley Writers Conference to talk about his work. Since 1995, the conference has brought together some of this country's leading writers and thinkers for thoughtful conversations on literature and life. I asked Mr. Packer what drew him back to Iraq again and again. First of all, welcome to Idaho.
Thank you.
You've not been here before?
I haven't, no. It's great to be here.
Well, welcome. From one eye to another eye, from Idaho to Iraq here. You've said you're an Iraq junkie, and that Iraq's gotten to you in a way that nothing since you were a Peace Corps volunteer ever has. Why is that?
I think because I first went there at the very beginning of the war and have watched the country descend into this hell over very slowly and then more quickly over the last few years, and then begin to emerge from it, and just to live it month by month, to have friends, to become connected to Iraqis, to grow very fond of some Iraqis, and then to see this, and of some Americans over there who are soldiers and civilians, and then to see it all just consume people in this horrible way. I've never seen anything like that before. I've never sort of experienced, even with that degree of, of distance, a war that grew so terrible. It's an unforgettable, and it's a sort of experience that makes you hesitate to commit yourself to anything, because I went into this war with a very ambivalent support for it, which was not public, it was my own feeling, and have felt somehow personally involved and somewhat responsible for that reason, and had high hopes. I mean, a lot of people did. A lot of Iraqis did. A lot of Americans did. To see those hopes disintegrate is pretty shattering. So, yeah, this is on a scale that I haven't experienced in my life. It's historic and big, and it'll certainly be with me forever.
Why were you, as you say, ambivalently for the war? You've called yourself an ambivalent liberal for the war. You've gotten some flack for that. There's been some hand-wringing over your position. Was it that Saddam Hussein was so cruel to his people that you held out the hope that it was a human rights nightmare that could be solved?
I couldn't imagine anything worse following Saddam Hussein. And when anti-war activists would say to me, we don't know what's going to come after this and it could be worse, I actually thought they were naive, because I thought they didn't understand the nature of a regime like that. They're too sheltered. They're Americans. And in some ways, both pro and anti-war Americans both suffer from being somewhat insulated from the world and from history. It seemed too easy an opinion. And yeah, I thought we owed it to Iraq because of the ugly entanglement we've had with that country since 91. We left things unfinished in 91. We've strangled it with sanctions. We have pursued a policy of containment that has worked okay but seemed to be falling apart. And in the end, it seemed untenable to continue that way. I certainly wouldn't have organized it and planned it and conducted it on the world stage as this administration did, but as I wrote in The Assassin's Gate, you don't get your choice of war. It's handed to you, and you have to make up your mind. And really, it was almost on the night of March 19th, 2003, I just asked myself, how do I feel about this? And I knew that I wanted it to succeed.
And is that why you went? I mean, it's not like you had this, huge Rolodex of contacts in Iraq.
That's
and
right.
It was a dangerous thing to do. Why did you decide to go in the first place?
Well, first of all, I didn't know how dangerous it was. When I went, it was the summer of 2003, and most of us thought the war was over, and this was the reconstruction phase. One soldier said to me, so you're sort of writing the aftermath, right? I said, yeah, sort of the aftermath. Well, it wasn't the aftermath. It was only the beginning, but it took a while for people to realize what was in store. I think maybe the biggest turning point was when terrorists blew up the United Nations building.
And an Idahoan died in that attack.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I was on my way out of the country that day. I knew some of the people who died in that explosion, and that told me this is a serious insurgency, and we're not ready for it. And that's after that first trip, I knew how unprepared we were. I came back with a kind of a sick feeling that this was going to overwhelm whatever the administration had imagined.
And how often have you been back? How many times?
6 times.
When was the last time you were there?
The last time was early '07. I went back to do a piece about the Iraqis who were working with the U.S. government as interpreters and other jobs.
Phenomenal piece. I have to say it's called Betrayed.
Betrayed, yeah.
I remember where I was when I was reading it. I was on an airplane, and I had this distinct feeling, or maybe I did do it, to tug on the shirt sleeve of the person next to me and say, look at this, read this. It's an article about the Iraqi translators and interpreters who essentially, in some instances, were left in great peril by our country.
That's right, and the minimal requests they made of our officials for protection were usually brushed aside with just a kind of bureaucratic indifference. And it was, to me, one of the great moral scandals of the war. And a friend actually said to me, this is up there with Abu Ghraib. And I think it is. It's quieter. It's not as graphic. It's not as disturbing. But when you think about what we owed these people and how much they risked to help us as well as to help themselves, and how little they asked and how little we gave, it sort of showed to me, a kind of rottenness that had set into the whole occupation. And it had to do with the green zone and the way in which our officials were cut off from the rest of the country. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was reporting that piece, I went into the embassy to interview the number 2 at the embassy about this situation, and I had some questions about why didn't you give these people higher security clearances so they could be searched inside the gates rather than outside, and all sorts of things like that. But by the time I got to his office, I had passed through maybe 3 or 4 security doors, sort of like the beginning of Get Smart, where the doors open and shut, and several searches and ID checks. And by the time I was there, it was as if not a single molecule of Baghdad was still in the air. We were in a sealed off, hermetic environment. There was no natural light, and there were no Iraqis, because this was the classified section of the embassy. And this was the security that they felt was necessary to do their work, but it was also the security that meant they had no idea what was happening right outside the gates of the green zone. I knew far more than they did. And they had spent, in some cases, more time in Iraq than I had. So that was part of the rottenness, the corruption of the occupation. It was the fact that we cut ourselves off from Iraqis. And so we stopped knowing and caring what was happening to them.
And really, in order to do the reporting, as Ann Garrels has noted so poignantly, you needed native Iraqis to do it, putting them even more at risk to do it. Were you ever did you ever feel in danger yourself?
Sure. I mean, in some ways, every minute I was there, I felt in danger. For me, the real fear was not so much a bomb or an IED going off or getting caught in crossfire, because that almost felt like just occupational hazard, and if it happens, it wasn't your day, and we all were willing to go out and take that risk. It was kidnapping.
The Daniel Pearl.
Yeah, it was being psychologically and physically tortured, in public view on the internet, on the web, and then killed. And just the fear of the aloneness of those last days and hours of one's life spent in the hands of people who had no concern whatsoever. That was terrifying. And there were times when I could have easily been kidnapped, a flat tire on the wrong stretch of highway, that kind of thing. So those were the bad moments.
The dominant feeling I got reading The Assassin's Gate was that you met a lot of good people trying to do good things with very little, or in some instances, no resources. I know that there are some who look at the situation and think that there are evil people involved, but you found some wonderful people, and in fact, the characters drive the story of this, don't they?
Yeah, I wanted to write this book in the model of a 19th century novel, where the reader gets to know a handful of characters and watches their lives play out on this big historical stage as they pass in and out of the story, and as the big events have an effect on their small lives. I was not so interested in the VIPs. I mean, I interviewed Bremer, I interviewed Condi Rice, but you don't get anything out of those interviews. What I really was interested in was the way more ordinary Americans and Iraqis, like a junior officer in the Army, or a mid-level civilian official, or a young woman working at the university, or a psychiatrist, or a doctor, how they saw what was happening, and especially how they each saw the other. I was always trying to figure out, what did the Iraqis think of these people who had shown up in their country? And what did the Americans think of this project that they had undertaken, in many cases with, as you say, high ideals, and which any thoughtful, sensitive person knew was going terribly wrong. And to watch people try to make sense of it and try to improve it when they were, in a sense, trying to dig their way out of a sand trap was humanly interesting. That was what interested me, was the psychology of the people involved, not so much the big policy questions.
It's interesting. Everybody seems to be writing a book now disavowing their complicity.
You mean all the officials?
Yeah.
Yeah, those books are not worth the paper they're printed on. I have not yet read a book by a high official who really took a hard look at his own responsibility. Instead, it's pass the buck time. And my guess is we're not going to get a book like that. I mean, Robert McNamara, for all the scorn that should be heaped on him, did attempt to atone for his own terrible mistakes by looking hard at them. Maybe not hard enough, but he did look hard at them. I was told by a very smart man, this is not that kind of war. These are not that kind of officials. They are neoconservatives, and that means they are not going to look back and ask what they did wrong. They're going to look around for who stabbed them in the back. So when we get Rumsfeld's memoirs and when we get Cheney's memoirs, they're not going to have an ounce of self-criticism. That's my
What do you think
prediction.
happened with Colin Powell? I mean, his testimony before the United Nations was pretty swaying.
Oh, and I think that eats away at him every day.
Do you?
I do. And I also think, I may be wrong, but I think Paul Wolfowitz is somewhat tormented as well. And it speaks a little better for them. I mean, I'd like to think that these guys are kept up at night. Colin Powell, said, after George Bush said he slept well after making the decision to go to war, he said he slept like a baby. Colin Powell said, so did I. I woke up screaming every 2 hours. That shows that Colin Powell knows something about what it meant to undertake this terribly risky thing. And the fact that his public posture has pretty much disappeared tells me that he is living with it.
What's the future? You had predicted that in this book that perhaps the escalating terrorism would drive the Iraqis towards their towards the Americans, just for safety's sake. We see the surge. It seems to have had at least a temporary calming effect.
Yeah.
But we took away Iran's biggest enemy in Saddam Hussein, and some predict that it will be a Shia nation, a Shia region.
I think what we have right now is a pause in what had become a civil war, and I think it's quite likely that it will resume. But the pause is important. I mean, it gives the Iraqi government the chance to make up for its own grievous errors. I have a friend who I got to know over there, a reporter, who's back after 2 years, and he just has been emailing me daily telling me, you wouldn't recognize it. I mean, there's thousands of people out on the streets well after dark. Women are going around without the scarf. That means the fear of the armed gangs, and that's what they had become. It had become gang warfare, is much lower, and that's a really good thing. I don't know that it's durable because the underlying political questions of basically whose country is it have not been answered.
And you're not in favor of us pulling out anytime soon, that it would cause more problems?
I'm not in favor of a timeline because I think timelines are blind. What you need is a withdrawal that is pegged to what's happening in certain parts of the country and what our needs are elsewhere, but not simply a blind withdrawal. I was in favor of the surge. I was in Iraq when it started, and basically my feeling was this is better than nothing, and until now we've had nothing. So I thought it was a turn in the right direction. I also know that this is a war that is not sustainable. The American people will not allow it to be sustained.
But do they care? Do they really seem to care? It seems that people,
No.
I mean, we don't have a draft, so it's selective who's going and who's dying. And it seems, at least from my talking to people, that it's kind of out there somewhere and there's a fatigue about it. And
There is fatigue, and there's been detachment from the beginning. I mean, this has been a war that has not involved the American people other than the military and their families. I mean, the burden has been carried by a tiny fraction of the country. And I think in a sense that was part of the administration's strategy to basically let us know that this wouldn't be all that costly. And that strategy has backfired because now they've lost the support of people whose support they never really worked to get.
there are so many conspiracy theories that float around, especially in the Middle East, and many
And in this country
and in
too.
this country too. In your research, in your conversations, in your travels, do any of them hold muster? For instance, that we went to war for oil.
I don't think they stand up to scrutiny. I mean, oil may have motivated some people in the administration. It certainly may have motivated some of their friends in the private sector. But I think this war was about power and ideas. This was an attempt to show the world, and especially the most volatile part of it, that the U.S. was not going to be beaten and pushed around, that we were going to strike back and remove people who were our enemies. And I think it was not a lot more sophisticated than that. And in fact, if oil was the motive, it was a pretty bad decision because for years we poured money into the Iraqi oil economy and got very little back. And look at gas prices today. So what was the benefit to us in terms of oil? I think it's impossible to make a case for it. It's that kind of thinking, which you're right, is very widespread in the Middle East, and
Including that we attacked our own World Trade Towers.
Yeah, I mean, the internet has been a source of massive disinformation all across the world, not least in the Middle East. And yeah, I met people in Iraq every day who asked me if we had allowed the looting because we wanted Iraq to destroy its own economy, etc. And I meet people in this country who are conspiracy-minded from the right and the left, whether it's we went to war for oil on the left, or Barack Obama won't put his hand on the Bible when he takes the oath of office from the right. So we have more and more information, and we seem to be less and less informed. And it's a paradox of the age of global media.
That's why it's so important to actually go there.
It is, and to meet people, to hear their stories, and at least to know what it means personally, so that when you come to your grand conclusions about it all, you at least have to take into account someone who said to you, this is what this war means to me.
Well, and it's interesting because Idaho is now becoming the recipient of many, many Iraqi refugees. We're designated as an area for resettlement.
I know a guy who ended up in Boise, in fact.
So more and more people here will be meeting Iraqis and hearing their stories. You mentioned that this was ultimately a war of ideas and ideals. You've written about how this, maybe it's the tipping point or Katrina, but that there's a fall right now of traditional conservatism, and that some of the ideals of that movement have worn out their welcome.
Yeah, I think that Iraq and Katrina were the death throes of the Bush administration. And the Bush administration itself was kind of the decadent period of the conservative movement. George W. Bush forgot all about the principles that had animated Barry Goldwater and Ronald Reagan: small government, balanced budget, skepticism about the ability of government to change lives and reshape cultures. Instead, we had a foreign policy that seemed to be based on a kind of a missionary principle that we could remake the world. And a lot of conservatives became quite disillusioned when things started to go wrong, and one could point to Iraq and Katrina as the foreign and domestic Waterloos. The big question for them is, what do they do? Do they go back to the pure version, the Goldwater version, the Reagan version?
You mean minus some of the social issues like abortion,
right,
homosexuality?
Right. Do they go back to basically small government and strong defense as the core of the movement? Or do they acknowledge that tendency really sort of did what it could and probably did achieve a lot, but that our times call for something new? That issues like economic inequality and stagnation, global warming, health care, the energy crisis, these cannot be solved by the market alone. And a lot of the conservatives I talk to who are free market fundamentalists have begun to think that the public will not trust them with power again until they have real solutions for today's problems, not the problems of the 60s and 70s, because America has changed. Times are always changing, and so movements have to change. And I think the smartest conservatives know that the days of Barry Goldwater won't come back, and they need to find a new way. And until then, I think Democrats are going to be winning elections, although I'm not sure they're going to win this election.
Because of race?
Race is a big part of it, I think. But it's not only race. I think Obama has a very hard time connecting with ordinary voters and making them feel that, if not actually being one of them, he really understands them and will represent them and fight for them, which is what Democrats always have to do. I mean, Bill Clinton got elected twice in the middle of this wilderness of Democratic defeats because he connected with those ordinary, let's say mostly white, more working class voters who really are the swing vote year after year. And Obama has not connected with them. I don't think it's impossible.
Even though, 15,000 people came to see him in Idaho, for instance.
And he won big here, but and he won in Montana, and he won in a lot of places you wouldn't expect him to win. I don't know how much that means in the general election. I think Obama stirred up a movement that was the most thrilling and inspiring thing we've seen in American politics maybe in 40 years. But that's a movement, and it still is a fairly narrow slice of the electorate. And now we're looking at a general election where people look at a movement and sort of, if they're not part of it, they feel a bit alienated from it, as if to say, wait a minute, why should I be so excited about this man? Who is he? What has he done? That's questions I hear a lot from voters. Not that I think those are entirely fair. I think you could ask them about a lot of presidential candidates, but for some reason Obama, because he's so new, and I think also because he's black, and because his name is odd, and because he didn't have a typical American upbringing, raises that suspicion.
Although, as you point out in your writings, Colin Powell, who kind of moved around as a military person and who's African American, that may have worked in his favor because he's of everywhere, of every person.
Well, for a black man to have a chance of winning, he has to transcend race. And Obama does transcend race. And Colin Powell does too. Colin Powell does it by being a military hero. And Obama does it by being mixed race and really being post-racial. His experiences are not those of the previous black generation that grew up with segregation and with all the resentments and the setbacks that come with segregation. His world is made up of white people, black people, mixed race people. They're entirely comfortable with each other, but I'm not sure that's the world that most Americans are living in. And his movement is inspired by that, but I don't know that the country as a whole is ready to embrace it.
As we wrap up, what's next for you? You just came back from Burma.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to read your article on that country. Afghanistan, Pakistan, where do you, I mean, you have a family now, so you're...
I do,
you know,
I do. I have a little boy, and that makes it a bit harder to contemplate going into war zones. I don't know, America interests me a lot these days. This election has kind of turned my focus back home, and I'll certainly do some more political reporting this fall, and maybe write a book that takes into account sort of the big changes happening in this country.
Well, you have to visit Idaho as part
I
of
will.
your book.
I'll be very happy to visit Idaho. It's a wonderful place.
Thanks for taking time to talk with us.
It's my pleasure.
That's all the time we have. I'm Marcia Franklin, and you've been listening to George Packer, a reporter for The New Yorker magazine. I'd like to thank him and the organizers of the Sun Valley Writers Conference for making time in his schedule for this conversation. If you'd like more information on Mr. Packer or the conference, check out the Dialogue website at idahoptv.org. And join us again for another episode of Dialogue, same time next week.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web.